Thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse, everyone. We're going to cover Nano today. Please like and subscribe if you guys like this content. I really appreciate that. And if you want to get notified of new videos, turn the notification bell on. We're going to go over the return on investment versus the days since inception. We're also going to cover some other graphs that we've looked at before. But I just want to, give a quick update here. I've posted this figure before in the Nano newsletter that I made a few months ago. I'm starting to think maybe I should make another one of those where I just go all out on a full report on what Nano is doing. So there's these figures show the return on investment versus days since inception for both Nano and Bitcoin. So both coins did remarkably well when they were first launched. Obviously, the Bitcoin data goes back, more than a decade, whereas the Nano data only goes back a couple years or so. But there's some really interesting things about this figure, and it really helps I think it helps me put things in perspective. So if you were in the cryptocurrency space, during this cycle here, or even say during this one over here, then you'll remember that the sentiment during these times where it was not great. I mean, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt in the market. People were confused. I remember over here, people were especially confused because, it just seemed like we just kept going down and down and down. And in the most recent market cycle, I feel like the sentiment was a little bit different because, you had a lot of people who've kind of experienced these same cycles many, many times. Well, anyways, looking at Nano here with respect to Bitcoin, or kind of just seeing what it did in comparison to Bitcoin, you can see that in terms of the ROI, Nano went 1,000x in those first few months. Which, if you'd been looking at this data here, you may have seen this 1,000x mark and known it was time to potentially take some profits there. Looking at graphs like this can really put things in perspective because when you enter into an asset, let's say you enter in like when it's already gone up like 20 or 30 times, you have to remember the people that bought in down here. It's going to be really hard for them not to sell at 100x, and it's going to be incredibly difficult for them not to sell up here. So you need to think about, where is the smart money coming in? I talked about smart money and dumb money. You need to think about that. If you're coming in up here, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's more of I would say it's even more speculation. It's more of a big gamble that the price is going to keep spiking. And when it does these kinds of things, it typically retraces very hard. So getting in way down here when people are when there's a lot of negative sentiment in the market. So for Bitcoin, it would have been down here. And if you had bought in down here and sold up here, I mean, think about that. Or if you had bought here and sold up here, or kind of where we currently were a few months ago, if you'd bought down here and sold way up here, wherever we're headed. So with Nano, what I see personally is I see we're down here, and we're basically at this point where I think the sentiment closely mimics that for what I've seen in the past for other coins. Clearly, there's going to be people that are going to comment on this and say the past doesn't necessarily predict the future, and just because Bitcoin did something 10 years ago or 5 years ago does not mean Nano is going to do it. Of course, that's true. If you feel the need to say that, go ahead and say it. I mean, I think most of us watching the video agree that that is a true statement. The point is to remember that the market sentiment was similar, and yet it still recovered. Okay. That doesn't mean Nano is going to, but it's possible for it to happen. It's done it with Bitcoin. It's done it with so many other coins before that, as far as I'm concerned, are not nearly as impressive as the tech with Nano is. And so for me, if getting in down here, even though I'm not offering financial advice, getting in down here is a really great time to get into Nano. And of course, short term, it's hard to say what's going to happen in the short term if we're going to go up 10 cents, if we're going to go down 10 cents. And, I don't really pay much attention to the short-term movements. I mean, with Bitcoin, these changes from one line to another are very significant. I mean, this is an ROI of 20 up to an ROI of 30 compared to its normalized starting price. Um, don't pay attention to the short-term stuff. That's kind of, that's the best advice I could give you in the cryptocurrency space. Um, I know it's hard if you bought up here and you're still holding, that can be hard. But this is, I think, where you're gonna, you're gonna, if Nano does go on a similar type run like Bitcoin, where imagine, it went up harder than Bitcoin, it fell harder than Bitcoin. If it continues the cycle, I mean, it could go up harder than Bitcoin again with respect to this 2015 cycle, or if you just want to transpose this over to this peak over here to this one and say we're over here, it's going to go up. I mean, obviously, change the y-axis scale. But I mean, the peak here for Bitcoin was 500, and the next peak was 10,000 in terms of a normalized ROI. So I mean, imagine if Nano were to do the same thing that Bitcoin did, it would at least get to around 10 to the 4, which that would mean, I mean, I guess since the all-time high of Nano was $38 at an ROI of 10 to the 3, then 10 to the 4 would be $380. And clearly that is going to draw some people who are going to criticize that, of course. And I mean, I don't know what the price of Nano is going to get to. I clearly have no idea, but that would just kind of put it in perspective as to where it could get if it were to emulate Bitcoin further. And that would be just if it went up to Bitcoin. If it goes up if it goes up 2x more, I mean, it could be significantly higher. I mean, we could be 700, 800 per nano. And that's not a price prediction by any means. That's just looking at what Bitcoin did and getting a feel for where it could be if it were to continue to emulate Bitcoin. Now, if you look at these moves, these moves that we're in, like where we come down, we have these concave up patterns, and then we have the concave down pattern. I mean, you can see these. This is the second derivative. If you think back to calculus, is this an inflection point? I guess I think this point here is going to be the inflection point, and it's gonna go up. But looking at these shifts here, Bitcoin experienced the same things. Maybe they weren't as pronounced as Nano, but you have to remember that this is a normalized scale. So going from, say, on this scale, going from an ROI of, say, 30 to 70 is going to look a lot bigger because it's logarithmic. So going up here, these oscillations that you're seeing Bitcoin have, the difference between, say, this data point and this data point is this would be an ROI of 2,000 versus 3,000, which is, a full 1,000 difference compared to a few hundred difference down here. So I want you to remember that this is a logarithmic scale. So take that into consideration, because I get a lot of comments on stuff. People, direct message me things, and I'll respond, but I just want to get out as much info as I can. So I hope this chart kind of puts things in perspective. If Nano were to go on this run that we're all hoping it's going to go on, it could be quite incredible. I want to show you another figure on this ROI thing, but this is interesting because we've also made the x-axis logarithmic. So time now is logarithmic. So this would be, 10 to the 1 would be 10 days from its starting day, so 100 days, 1,000 days, 10,000 days. So the reason why I like this graph is because a lot of us are short-term thinkers. We kind of overestimate what can happen in the short term, but underestimate what can happen in the long term. So the difference between this data point and this data point is only 900 days, but between this one and this one is 9,000 days. So you got to really start thinking years and years out into the future. The point is look how similar Bitcoin and Nano were. I mean, in fact, Nano was very, very much more impressive. And what's crazy is on this scale, it's really interesting how quickly things can just shoot up when you normalize, or when you make the x-axis, the time axis, logarithmic. If you were to imagine if we're in one of these downtrends here, I mean, it can spike up really quickly when you're looking at time frames of several months at a time. Like if you could just imagine, like, step through Nano's future price history like 4 or 5 months at a time, it'd be really incredible to see what would happen. So just I want to provide these figures just to give you some perspective on where Nano is, and to encourage you in the sense that market sentiment has existed like this for other coins in the past, and they still recovered. And that does not mean that Nano will, the obvious disclaimer, but it doesn't mean that it won't. So I want to quickly go back, because I know a lot of you guys have seen the previous videos I've made. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here is if we compare Nano to Bitcoin, and I've shown you guys this before in the last video, and so far it has come true. I don't know if it's going to continue to, but if you were to go to Bitcoin and just take this time from this peak up here to when Nano first crossed the 50, or from when Bitcoin first crossed that 50-day moving average after the death cross in the 2015 bear market, it was 664 days. Okay, I showed you guys this in the last video. Now, if we take that move for Nano, now that it's occurred, so it's occurred, we had the death cross, and now we've crossed the 50-day. So let's zoom in. I'll probably have to fix this, but if we just take a measured move and we zoom in all the way down to where we cross that 50-day, and we just pick it right there, and then we look to see how long it was around 661 days. And obviously it depends on exactly the point where you pick the data. So actually we want to move this over because that was the peak over here. And so you can see, so for Nano it was 663 days from the peak to when we first crossed that 50-day moving average. And obviously there's going to be some uncertainty bar here because I'm not zooming in exactly to get the day perfect. But 663 days for Nano to go from the peak at its all-time high to the death cross, so the golden cross, the death cross during the accumulation phase, and then after the death cross, crossing over the 50-day moving average, and kind of holding it there for a little bit. So Bitcoin did the same thing, and it took it 664 days. So it's eerily similar, guys, to what Bitcoin did. Now that we've kind of gone above this 50-day, what's next? Okay. So for Bitcoin, as we mentioned before, we really want to hold the 20-week moving average as support in order to really confirm that we're in the bull market, right? So let's go ahead and put on here that 20-week moving average so we can kind of see where it is so far, and you can see it's this line right here. So let's just make it a bit thicker so we can see it better, and let's make it blue. Okay, so you can see that Bitcoin did hold it, and I've gone through several videos where I talk about how Bitcoin holds it as support during a bull market. You can just see it right there. You can scroll back into other videos and see it, and it holds it as resistance during the bear. So recently, it broke it, and then it's now holding it as resistance. So it's dubious as to whether Bitcoin is going to pop above the 20-week in the short term. The point is if you believe in the long-term market cycle, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't go above the 20-week immediately, it just means you have more time to accumulate Bitcoin or other coins that you might be interested in, like Nano or whatever it might be. But if we look back at Nano, so we just crossed that 50-day, okay? And it looks like we're not immediately dropping below it like we have in the past. So you can see we crossed it here, immediately drop below it. Crossed it here, drop below it. But these were also before the death cross. So after Bitcoin had that death cross, hit the 50-day, went above it. As a reminder, you can see it here, hit the 50-day and then went above it. And then it had this really big run. Okay, and then from there it held after going on that run on the weekly, it held that 20-week moving average. Okay, so what's next? What is our next target? If we can continue to stay above the 50-day, which is probably going to be somewhat dependent on Bitcoin, what it does with the 20-week. So the next thing we're going to want to look at is what did Bitcoin do? So the next thing it had to get past is the the 50 moving average, but on the 3-day time frame. Okay, so um, so if you look at, so this is basically 150. So if you look at this, as it was going up, it held that as resistance actually for a couple weeks before it was able to pop above it. And once it did pop above it, it really went going. It really got going. So where's nanos? If we look at nanos, okay. So reminder, we crossed the 50-day moving average on the daily time frame. Obviously, it's the daily time frame if it's a 50-day moving average. We crossed it. So our next target is going to be this one. All right. If we can cross this one, which is what Bitcoin did back in 2015, once we cross this one, that is when Bitcoin really saw a large correction, and this buy zone down here was just a distant memory, and we never returned back to this zone. Even the peak of this accumulation phase. So if you imagine this is Nano, where it went from say 70 cents to $2 back to 70 cents, even the $2 mark, we could easily fly past that. Maybe we're going to come back down and hold that $2 mark as support. But I really think that this is there's a decent chance that Nano is going to follow this path. So we need to get to this. We need to hit this target here. So currently that target is around $1, a little over $1. So if you imagine if we continue to trickle up here, maybe we'll cross it at around $1. And then once we hit $1, then more and more people are going to get bullish again on Nano. And $1 is kind of a nice price, because if you put $1,000 in, you get 1,000 Nano. It's kind of also easy for humans, just to kind of keep track of that stuff, in terms of just in your head thinking, okay, I made $1,000 purchase, I got 1,000 Nano. Today it's worth $2, so it's worth, my portfolio value for Nano is worth $2,000, or it's worth $10 a piece, so it's worth $10,000. It makes it easy for some people. So I'm going to be looking for this as our next target, and then following that on the weekly, the weekly happened pretty shortly after. So if you look at Bitcoin, it crossed it on the 50-day, it crossed it on around September 28th, and then on the 3-day time frame, it crossed it on October 13th. So it was about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks later. So if Nano were to do the same thing, cross the 50-day on October 28th. So yeah, it's pretty close to the same. Okay, so, but it's about a month off. So for Bitcoin, it was September 28th, and then it was about 2.5 weeks later. So for Nano, it would be, if we were to hold that same thing, it would basically just be, around this time frame when we might be passing the 50 on the 3-day. So 150, and we'll keep an eye on that. So far Nano has kind of gone during the bull market. The price went way above Bitcoin's when it was normalized, and then during the bear market it's gone below it. And then this cycle seems to be longer than it was for Bitcoin. So it kind of seems like things are more pronounced. So it might be a little bit shorter. It could be a little bit longer. I don't know exactly, but what I'm thinking is hopefully something like where we just kind of we just trickle up, and it's hard to get the exact time frame down, obviously, but at some point, I think we're really gonna take off here, and then once we do take off, I think it's likely we're gonna come back down to maybe the top of these candles here, and then sit in that region for a little bit. Obviously, I don't know when this is going to exactly happen. I'd like to think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, but I don't know. But this is, these are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear you guys' comments down below. If you guys think something like this might happen, or if you just think maybe we're going to stay down here for a lot longer. It'll be interesting to see what you guys think, because there have certainly been coins. There's different coins that they have different cycles with respect to Bitcoin. So I mean, everyone likes to talk about an alt season, but really, I mean, Ethereum behaves very differently than a lot of coins during the Bitcoin cycle, and Litecoin behaves differently when compared to Ethereum and with respect to Bitcoin. So we don't fully know how Nano is going to behave because this is Nano's first full market cycle. But if we could fast forward 5 years, and Nano does take off, and we were here during this time. We were here talking about Nano when no one else was, and really building out the project and building out the community. So I think that's it. So just main takeaways from the video: just keep things in perspective in terms of the ROI, what Nano is doing, how it compares to Bitcoin, how market sentiment was the same for both assets during these cycles, and how eerily similar the time since the all-time high to crossing that 50-day was within a day. And we'll see if it continues to hold, or if all of it's going to break down and Bitcoin drops back down to 5,000 or something. Then we'll see. But I think that's it for this video. Again, please subscribe to the channel if you guys like the content. Alright guys, bye.